11, 10, 15, 14, 11, 12, 14, 14, 12, 11, and number 10. Welcome to the last 11 seasons of Crystal Palace's history. In 11 seasons, they have lived within a matter of 5 league positions. Crystal Palace, for the last decade, has lived in mediocrity. However, things, as of right now, may all change. Of all times to do a video about Crystal Palace, this may be the time to not do one, because, well, they've got some pretty good players. Vizeh, Eze, Wharton, Gahey, some great talent. You may be surprised when I say to you that Crystal Palace is the most represented club in the entirety of the England national team. Tell me down below your thoughts about Crystal Palace, and do you think they have what it takes to actually go forward and break into that European football mold? Something that many clubs have done in recent years, like Newcastle, Aston Villa, Brighton, and I mean even Burnley was in the Europa League and qualified for that before Crystal Palace. If you do enjoy, smash a like button. Let's try to hit 3,000 likes. I know that during the Euros it's a bit crazy of when to upload videos, so I typically upload mine quite late. Subscribe if you want more, and Vizeh designs for the best football prints, all made by myself. Give it a check. I cover pretty much every single club in England and even Scotland, so thank you, and let's get into it. Being a football fan is meant to be a roller coaster of emotions, every kind, the highs and the lows. But being a Crystal Palace fan is more like a very stable and flat train track, always working, always at the same speed, and there's nothing else about it. In the last 11 seasons, they've finished between either 10th or 15th, and in terms of points tallies, they've only been between 41 points and 49 points. Now granted, every season, despite the positions, always comes and goes in different ways. For example, last season, they at one point had a real threat of relegation. In January, back against Arsenal, the fans put out a banner in the away end after being battered by Arsenal. The banners was the following: wasted potential, on and off the pitch, weak decisions, taking us backwards. Now this was critiqued by quite a lot of people, as despite Palace weren't exactly in the relegation zone, they weren't going in the right direction whatsoever, and people critiqued them saying, well, what do you expect? What more do you want from Crystal Palace? Well, maybe some hope. That would maybe be a good start. Roy Hodgson, who was a great servant of Crystal Palace, made way and left the football club. He was replaced in February by a man called Oliver Glasner, an Austrian football coach, which for many people, they really had no idea about what to expect from him. However, he completely revived the football club, moving Palace from 15th to 12th and into 10th, with 6 wins and 3 draws during that time period, getting the absolute best out of Eze, Vizeh, Wharton, the entire squad. They looked like a completely new team, and also stayed up ahead of their rivals, Brighton, by 1 point. I kind of had to put that in there because they would shout at me if I didn't. Things are looking up for Crystal Palace. However, there's always the fear of selling players. However, Crystal Palace, like pretty much every club in the Premier League that's outside top 6, enters into this realm of a stepping stone club, where you have these young talents that comes through, and typically the top 6 or clubs overseas will want to be interested. However, Wilfried Zaha may be the outlier in that scenario, where for many years Palace managed to keep hold of their man for multiple transfer windows despite a lot of interest from many clubs about him. Palace had a price for their man, and in the end, Zaha stayed at the club for a lot longer than what people would have typically expected. He did end up going this season to a strange club in Galatasaray. However, he ended up going on a free transfer. I asked a Palace friend of mine, what is it like to support Palace? Is it as boring as what people make it out? And he said, well, simply that it's not boring because it's still your club. You still feel excited for every game like any other fan. However, there has been times that you feel frustrated that you see other teams coming up and performing much better than you and reaching the expectations that you would want to do. From an outside perspective, being a consistent lower mid-table Premier League side is not interesting to me. And I would know that being a Burnley fan. We was part of that for many years. Burnley were in the Premier League for 7 years and weren't really ever in a relegation battle. This may be surprising to you, but other than 2018-19 that we had a bit of a scare, other than that, we were comfortably up by quite a large margin in quite a few years. At least the traditional yo-yo teams like a Norwich City or a Fulham, or what people may now claim Burnley are now, has enjoyed a seasonal dominance, and then they may go down, but then the next year they would typically do quite well. And as always, even after one poor year, they would have a year where everyone loves it. Burnley did that last time round. For this video, I had to go get the big guns, and I had to go reach out to someone that I would consider a friend in the industry and someone that I do respect a lot. If you're a Palace fan, you definitely should know of him, and on Twitter, he gets about quite well. Hopkins looking to curl one. He's got a great podcast, and go and check it out. I reached out to ask him 3 main questions to help out with this video, and I did want to give a Palace fan's insight to give a different perspective onto the idea that they're a boring club or they're a mediocre club. So I reached out to him, and this was his response. The first question was simply, what does Palace represent to you, and what's your response to those that label Palace as a boring club?
I understand why, if you're not part of the Palace bubble or from South London or embedded in the club, that you would see it as, the definition of mediocrity, I guess. But the way I've always tried to spin it to, I wouldn't necessarily say outsiders, but to people that aren't, like we are. And that level of pride and identity that we have with that corner of London is something that, for me, epitomises us. You look at things like the youth academy, the players that have come through there, the fact that we've come through 2 administrations. As recently as 2010, we had 10 points taken off us. We had the players playing for free, purely for the pride in the shirt, for 3 months. We managed to come through that, and then 3 years after administration, we got ourselves into the Premier League against all the odds, and we've been there ever since. You can see it as mediocrity if you're going to broad brushstroke it, or you can look at a true success story with a Palace fan as an owner in Steve Parish, who took over in 2010 and has been here ever since. If you look at it from our point of view, it's easy to spin it as the most successful, sustained period that we've ever had.
I absolutely loved this answer, and he's absolutely spot on. And I do forget how recent Palace was in administration. They've not only once but twice, but in 2010 they were in administration by a man that you probably should know of if you watch anything to do with TalkSport, Simon Jordan. And they were in a pretty bad situation at the club, and it does give a different perspective. They're not exactly a big club compared to many other clubs in Premier League, so it's always an achievement no matter how you spin it, because believe it or not, the game is getting more and more obsessive with money and power, and it will only get worse and worse. So the likes of a Palace ran by a chairman which is a fan of the club and still close to its community is what it should be always about. The second question I asked him was, why do you believe Palace has been so consistent / stagnant in the last decade, and the general lack of ambition in prior years?
I think it's sometimes easy to forget, or at least to minimise the scale of the achievement in terms of staying in the Premier League for 11 years straight. Because, we used to be the definition of a yo-yo club, in the Premier League for 1 year, back down, back up, back down, back up. And instead, we've been here now for 11 straight. I don't think that's something that should be taken lightly. You look at PSR, you look at the amount of money that gets spent. I don't think it's as simple as just, you finish between 12th and 15th every year, therefore it's boring. Because unless you are one of the established 6 to 8 bigger clubs in the league, look at Leeds United as a prime example, bigger than us in almost every single way. They haven't made it into the Premier League for that period of time for God knows how long. The size of their fan base, their history, their pedigree, they are not here, and we are. And I'm not saying it's the be-all and end-all, but this suggestion that being in the Premier League and comfortably in mid-table is somehow boring for the fans, I just don't buy it.
I will leave his response for you guys to break down for yourself. Comment down below, what do you think about the points that he made just then? Is it completely valid? How would you feel if your club was in a similar situation to Palace? And number 3 I asked was, do you think next year could be the one where Palace can step up to be challenging for the European spots?
I do honestly believe, and it's not something I've ever said before, I don't want this to come across as though, I'm getting carried away purely because of 3 or 4 months, because I've never actually felt like this about Crystal Palace in the Premier League in my life. You look at the way we've played in this last 3 months, you look at, 3-4 months now, the last 3 months of the Premier League season, you look at the players that we've got, even if we were to lose one of Michael Olise or Robert Eze, we've still got Adam Morton, Daniel Munoz, Mark Gay, Joachim Anderson, Chet Decore, John-Philippe Mateta. There's quality all the way through the side. There are players here who, if they can stay fit, alongside the tactical approach of Oliver Glasner, the more ambitious style of play, the fitness levels that have gone through the roof, I do honestly believe that we could be around 7th or 8th. I'm not expecting it. I don't think you can ever do that as a Palace fan, but I think there is certainly scope to believe it is possible. And that is the first time, honestly, that I can say I've ever thought that throughout my entire life, not just this 11-year spell in the Premier League since we won promotion in 2013.
I did really like this response because you could tell that he's someone that is in the industry and he knows how quickly speaking out when it comes to a sort of bold prediction, especially about your own football club, can easily come back to haunt you. And trust me, I've been there and done that. But that's the entire point of football, is about having hope that maybe you can actually go on to achieve great things. And that's the entire point of it. And I don't think he is silly for believing in next year. Even something as what many people would believe isn't even that interesting as 7th or 8th. That'll be a huge achievement for Palace. He's completely right in believing that. I want to say thank you to HLTCO for taking part in this video. Make sure to go check him out. His link is down below in the description. Absolute top bloke. Palace are the most consistent club in any of England's top 4 divisions, which would make them the most boring club. The only real kind of teams you could compare to that is a Bristol City or a Preston North End. I did an entire video about Bristol City of why I deem them to be the most boring club, because despite Palace being almost as boring, at least they're still in the Premier League. Bristol City, they always to me feel like they're just underperforming the expectations of the region. They got a massive catchment area, so I feel like they could be so much bigger than what they actually are. And being mediocre in the Championship is worse than being mediocre in the Premier League. Obviously, there is another team which deserves to be put down as a boring team, but it's more sad than anything else, Oldham Athletic, where, believe it or not, you may be surprised, or you may know of them because you may be like, wait, but they were a Premier League team, which you'd be correct. Back in 1992, 1993, they were in the original Premier League, and since then, they've not experienced one promotion. Ever since their promotion in the early 90s, they've not had a single promotion in any season ever since. That makes it over 30 years where Oldham Athletic fans have not experienced a single promotion in their history. And to make it even worse, they are now in the National League. So they've gone down and down and down with no real actual hope or excitement of even going back up again. They've only ever been in the playoffs 2 times in those 30 years in League 1 and League 2. The consistency of Palace is a balancing act where it's very tough to qualify for Europe. Wolves, Sheffield United, Burnley, Leeds, Brentford, of course Leicester City, Brighton, all teams that have had much more better seasons in that time period. To give Palace some credit, they definitely have an identity, a feel about the football club. Palace does feel quite different. Their style of play sometimes can be a bit uninspiring, the likes of a Alan Pardew, a Sam Allardyce, a Roy Hodgson, which is fair, but then they have tried to go elsewhere. Frank de Boer was one of them, which lasted, I think, 6 games, and then Patrick Vieira, which lasted about a season and a half. Palace typically sits deep and play in a counter-attack. They've usually got a decent stable base at the back, and they will always aim to use tricky wingers up top to break down and to create goals. This counter-attacking style means that Palace is very commonly known for getting big upsets against the top 6 clubs. For example, the last 6 visits at the Etihad Stadium, Man City Stadium, they've had 2 wins, 2 draws and 2 losses, which is one of the best records compared to any other team in the Premier League in general. In the last 7 years, they've beat City, Liverpool, United, Chelsea and Arsenal all the way from home. When I spoke to a Palace friend of mine, a true, proper community feel, which is something that is rare with many Premier League teams these days. They seem to have a quite strong moral compass in terms of how they portray themselves, and the identity of playing tricky wingers and flair players to get the fans off their feet. There is community there, and that's the best thing I can say about Palace. And if anything, it gives it more frustration of why Palace still hasn't cracked on. However, again, as I said, this may be the best time for Palace in their recent history. With the players that they currently have, if they can keep a good chunk of them, next year could be something different, and they could maybe challenge for a European spot. And I kind of hope they do. So tell me your thoughts down below in comments, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.